Okay, so welcome to our class on sewing a very easy pull-on knit skirt. So you need a piece of paper for this to start with to make your pattern. I've actually taken a fairly wide piece, folded it in half, and I'll show you why in a minute. You don't have to have this. This is going to be my center front fold here of my skirt, but I'll show you why I like to cut both halves. So you need to take your waist measurement, and you need to take your hip measurement, which is about 9 inches below your waist. So I'm just writing my measurements in here. Then you want to take your measurement about 2 inches below your natural waist. So on some people it's going to be just below the belly button, might be just on. I just like to have a little bit wider measurement than my waist measurement for the top of my skirt. So I'm just going to write that in. And for me, and maybe some of you will find this as well, I find that there's a huge difference between my waist and 2 inches below. It's just what happens sometimes with age. We just don't have the same hourglass shape that we used to. So I've got these measurements. I'm going to divide these 3 measurements by 4 because I'm going to be doing a quarter of this skirt pattern. So this is going to be half of the front. It will also be half of the back because we're making the back and the front the same. So my waist measurement is going to be 7 3/4 of an inch, and this is done in inches. And I'm getting that from my waist. My below the waist, which is the actual measurement that I'm going to use for the top, is going to be 9 inches. My hip is going to be 9 1/2. Now the other measurement that I want to have is the length of my skirt. So you want to find your actual waist. So find where your waist is. Generally, smallest part of your body, just below your bottom rib. So I'm going to take a measurement, and I'm going to take it from the side, from my waist down to where I want. I want this skirt to be 19 inches long. Now, you can take and tie a string or something around your waist so that you've got it nice and straight. Make sure that it's straight around your waist. You can take that same measurement at center front, from the center front of your waist down to wherever. If you've decided 19 inches, see where 19 inches goes on your legs. Make sure that it looks like the same spot. You can do it on the back as well, from your back of your waist down to the back. Now that's the only area where some of us, if you have a sway back, you tend to have it, you need a little more room in the length to go in over the sway of your back and then across your hips and down. So if that's the case, you may find that you're from center back waist to where you want it to be, that lines up with your side and your front, you may be a 1/2 inch longer, you may be an inch longer. So just take a note of that, because then you will have to make a back and a front to your pattern, because your back will have to be a little longer at the center back than your front is. So I've got these measurements. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to take from my fold of my fabric, or fold of my paper, or the edge of my paper, I want to square off a line here. I'm not going to measure it right at the moment, but this is going to represent my waist. Okay, so I'm just putting a W here. I'm going to measure about 9 inches down, and that's going to be right in the middle of all this writing that I've done. And I am going to square this off as well and draw a line. This is going to be my hip, okay? So hopefully you can see that line amongst all that writing. The other thing I want to do is I want to take from the center front, and I want to measure down length of my skirt. So it's going to come down to here to 19 inches. Same thing down here. You want to make sure that this is lined up, squared up perfectly with your edge of your paper, and you're going to take and draw a line here, okay? Next thing I want to do is I want to take this 2 inches below the waist measurement, So I've got it. It was 36 inches. I've quartered it, so that gives me 9. So over here at my waist, I want to measure over, so get your tape measure right on the edge of your paper. I'm going to measure over 9 inches. So you're going to make a mark here. Now the other thing I want to do here as well is I want to sort of draw a line that make sure that that 9-inch line extends above and below. Not so important below, but definitely important that it extends above that 9 inches. I'm going to go to my hip, and quarter of my hip measurement has got to be 9.5 inches. So I'm going to measure over here, and I'm actually going to take a different color simply because I'm in the middle of where I've done all this writing. So, okay, so you can see here I've got extended my line again. Okay, so the bottom line, this is what we have to decide as far as our skirt goes. How much flare do you want it to have? I don't want a big flare. I want to do this just a slight A-line. So generally a straight skirt would fall straight down from your hip to the hem. That's going to give you a straight skirt. So I'm just going to very lightly draw that line. So hopefully you can see this line here. So this would be a straight skirt. I don't want it straight. I want to have a little bit of flare. And I want to make sure that roughly I've got about, I'm going to say, I want to have 3 inches of extra flare. So I'm going to measure over from here 3 inches. Okay, so this is going to be a quarter of what my hem is going to be. And again, I'm going to take this and I'm just going to make sure that that line extends above my hem line. You'll see why in a few minutes, why we want to have a little bit of an extension. Okay, so now I'm basically going to connect the dots here. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to take, actually going to take a ruler because it's going to be straighter. We don't need to have this line curved or anything else. So I know that I want my hem or my side to be at 19 inches. So this is my waist here. I want to have a little bit of a curve in my waist. And the reason why I want to have that is the corner that I'm going to sew together for my waist at the front and the back should have a right angle. Okay, so if I take and I line this up, I find where I'm at 19 inches and I line it up. I'm gonna bring this line up about a ½ inch, so I've got a curve. So my natural waist, I'm gonna actually curve back down to my waist. Okay, I want this to be a right angle up here, so you see how my ruler is going to form a right angle. I want it to come to 19 inches. I'm actually going to flip this over, so I will be looking at this ruler backwards. So what I am doing is, you see how I've extended my line down here up, because this indicates how wide I want the flare of my skirt. And this indicates where my side seam is going to start on my curve of my waist, because I don't want it to be straight across. It's not going to hang, it's not going to fit your waist the same. So now what I'm doing is I'm lining the top edge of my ruler, and I'm going over here and I'm making sure the 19 hits the line that I've extended up. So the key is, when I go and draw my line, that it's going to cross that line at 19 inches. I'm going to draw it all the way up to that ½ inch above my waist, and I should have a right angle here. I'm going to just take this. So you see there I have a nice right angle. Okay. So now what I'm going to do with this line is I am going to curve it back, and I am going to grab a curved ruler. So here I've got my curved ruler. So I've already got a bit of a straight line here, so I want to make sure that I keep that fairly straight. So I'm just going to sort of find a spot on my ruler here where I've got a nice curve that gradually goes back into my waistline, okay? So this is the waistline of my skirt, and this is the side seam of my skirt. So you can see side seam, this, I'll flip this back over. So this measures out from there down to 19 inches. This is my front, which is 19 inches. I'll just double check. So this comes out at 19 here. So now what I have to do is I have to take this corner and I have to gradually blend it back in to my hem. So I'm just going to take my ruler again with the curve, just like we did at the waist. And you see how I've curved it up. Just get this back onto the pencil line. So this is now representing my hemline, okay? The other thing you want to double check before you cut your pattern is down here again, another right angle. This corner here should be a right angle. If you don't have a right angle here or here, what happens when you sew the sides together is you end up with a peak, and you'll end up with a peak or a high point at your side seam. So that's why you always want to have a right angle wherever your seams are going to join back together. So basically, this is my pattern. All I have to do now is take this ruler. I can actually find the 1/4 inch. You decide what you want for a hem or for a seam allowance. I'm going to take and draw a quarter. Actually, I'm going to draw 3/8 inch because we're going to be sewing with the sewing machine rather than the serger. If I was going to serge this, I would only have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Because I'm going to show you how to sew this skirt with a sewing machine, in case you don't have a serger, I'm going to add 3/8 inch. Still smaller than that 5/8. You don't need, with a knit fabric, you do not need to have 5/8 inch. It's just a waist, it's too bulky, and you're going to end up cutting it off. So I've got my 3/8 inch here. Still make sure that when you draw your seam allowance, you've still maintained that right angle. I'm going to go all the way across here. I've just found my 3/8 inch line. Now, something else you want to remember whenever you are drawing with anything, I'm using a fairly wide highlighter marker here. So when I cut this, I'm going to cut on the inside of this line. If I cut on the outside, I'm going to add about an 1/8 or a 1/16 inch to all my seams. And if I'm following the 3/8 inch guide on my sewing machine, I'm going to have actually added a bit. It's not going to be too important because it's a knit, so it doesn't matter if you've got a little extra or a little less because there is some stretch there. So then you're going to decide on your hem. I don't like a big hem on a knit. I would say 5/8 inch or, 3/4 maybe maximum. It just sort of depends on what you've got for fabric. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it at 3/4. And again, using my grading ruler here, I'm just going to find the 3/4 mark, and the end of the ruler, I just bring it up and draw a line. So I end up with a series of sort of dashes across the bottom. And then what you can do with that is you can take your curved ruler and just sort of join them up. Make sure it blends smoothly. You don't want any points or any high or low spots. It should all blend into a nice smooth line. So there's my 3/4 inch hemline, and if I took this ruler along anywhere in here, it's going to come out at 3/4 inch. The other thing I want to show you just before we cut this pattern out is, remember here, this was our hip. This is a quarter of my hip, and I want to make sure that I've got enough fabric to not be too small for my hip, because we really didn't pay too much attention there. So if you look here, you want to make sure that where your skirt is coming out on an angle, it's coming out farther than where your hip line is. So I'm going to have, if I measure this distance here from my hip to the actual stitching line, I've got about 1 3/8 inches. So times 4, that's 5, that's almost 6 inches. So that's going to be enough around the skirt. Remember, I don't want this to be a really full skirt. This is still just a nice little A-line skirt. So there's my skirt all ready to cut out. So I'm going to take a pair of scissors, and remember, use paper scissors, and I'm going to cut this pattern out, and I have it on the fold, and I'll show you why. It doesn't matter. If you don't have it on the fold, just draw your fold line in here. Now, if you need to, you can make notches in it. And if you're going to make a notch, I would make it at this hip line here. You won't have a zipper, you won't have buttons, you won't have anything, any opening in this skirt. I'm just going off of my line here, so I'm just trying to get it back on track. Cutting my skirt out. Okay, so there's my pattern. Now, when I open this up, you can see now I have both sides of this pattern. So sometimes I find this useful depending on the fabric that I've got. It's maybe easier to lay this out because, remember, this is going to be the back and the front. If you found that your back length from center waist down is longer, then this, you're going to have to make a separate piece, and you're going to have to bring your back length down and blend your side seam, which will still remain whatever it is. In this case, 19 inches. You're going to have to blend that down to whatever you needed if you have to lengthen the back. Okay, so you see now I have a full piece. The reason why I like this is, now generally with a knit, I want my straight of grain of my knit going straight up and down here. But maybe for some reason I decide I want to cut this on a bit of a bias. In order to determine the bias, what I'm going to do is, I've got my hip line here, so I'm going to line my ruler up with my center line. So I've got a 1-inch marker here. So I've got 1 inch square. So I'll just draw around this. So you see here I've drawn a 1-inch square. So in order to find the bias, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from corner to corner. I'm going to extend it. So you see now, there's my bias line, okay? So if for some reason I don't want to cut the pattern with the pattern going up and down, I want to cut my grain this way. So now this is still my grain line, but my pattern might be a little off. It just depends on your fabric. Now, a knit will hang a little bit differently when you do cut it on the bias. Generally you don't, but experiment. You know, if you've got this here, you can always play around. Okay, so here's my pattern. For my waistline, really simple. Again, I'm going to take I'm going to fold this here, and my waist was 31 inches. So depending on the stretch of my fabric, I'm either going to cut this at 31 inches or I'm going to cut it a little bit less. So I think what I'm going to do, so half of 31 is 15 and a half, because I've got it on the fold here. So I'm going to square this up. I'm going to just I'm drawing straight rectangle. I want my waistband, I don't want it very big. So I'm going to draw it so that when it's opened up, or when it's folded, it's going to be 1.5 inches high once it's sewn on. So because I'm going to fold it, I'm going to need to cut it 3 inches. So I'm just going to take and line this ruler up here. So cut this out, and then I'm cutting this out. I'm forgetting to add my seam allowances. So I've already started to cut this here. What I'm going to do is I would want to have put 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on each side of that line. Didn't do it, so here's how I'm going to fix that mistake. 3/8 and 3/8 is 6/8, which is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm actually just going to extend this side by 3/4 of an inch. And same here. I want to put 3/8 on the end before I go ahead and cut that. Okay, so you see how this is just a pattern piece, so it doesn't really matter. I'm not tracing any of these lines, so I'm just going to know that I've got 3/8 on this side to sew and 3/8 on this side. So I'm going to cut this. You want to keep your paper together because I do have it folded. So this is now my waistband, okay? So I'll move this paper out of the way. So this is going to be my waistband. I'm going to cut one piece of fabric out of this. And I like to cut this so that it is cut. This is my grain line. So on a knit fabric, the stretchiest way, if I was to pull the fabric, this is the stretchiest way. That's what I want from my waistband. Because if you remember, this is only 31 inches. And the top of my waist here was 36. Okay, so you can already see I've got to gather, or I've got to ease 5 inches all the way around onto my skirt. Okay, so if you know, everybody's going to be a little bit different. For me, I know that sounds like a lot, but I know that where I measured on myself, that's going to stretch out. I'm going to stretch this out. It's not going to be all gathered and pulled, because my waistband, the top of my waistband is going to be sitting, when I fold this and stitch this 3/8 edge to the top of my skirt, this is going to be sitting up just about a little bit below my waist. So, and it's smaller. It's going to be a little bit smaller there, or just right so that it's going to fit. I probably will put a piece of elastic in here, which I will show you when we get into the construction part, so that you can see how this is all constructed. But so here's my two pieces. Here's my skirt. So this is a knit skirt. Always write on your pattern pieces. Put your name on it. I'm just going to put Colleen. I'm going to put May. Actually, we're June now, but May 2020. Okay, so cut 2. So front and back. Okay, so I'm going to cut 2 of this fabric. This is my waist. This is my grain line, so this is waistband for a knit skirt. I better put the same date on here, May 2020. Colleen, just in case I get making something for somebody else. So this is my grain line here. Because I may not cut this on the fold, I'm not going to use the bias grain. I have it there in case I do want to use it, but this is going to be my grain line, okay? So there's my two pieces. There's my skirt all put together, and that actually took longer just about than what it's going to take to construct it.